Hello and welcome to Terrain Odyssey. My name is Jay and today I'm going to be making a modular city board that essentially I'm making for Marvel Crisis Protocol, but you could adopt this technique to other games, you know, like Walking Dead springs to mind, etc. Now, I am very much aware that Mel the Terrain Tutor has done a version of this and it is incredible. I will leave a link in the description. However, the materials that he uses are essentially completely different from the materials that I use. So I'm going to show you, and you know, it's up to you if you take what I do on board or you go and watch his video. Either is fine as long as you end up with a better battlefield for your games, which is my whole purpose, I guess. So there's a couple of things to talk about. Like, I'm doing a 3 foot by 3 foot board. I'm going to use 1 foot by 1 foot tiles, mainly because I need to get this into my loft/attic, and I'm just to store it, and I'm very worried that if I use 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot that it might not get in and out very easily. But I'll try and answer some questions and why I did certain stuff at the end. For now though, I would normally show you one of my boards. For now though, we'll just get straight into it. If though at the end of this video you like the video, please like the video, and if you're not subscribed and you're interested in terrain as a whole for your wargaming, etc., you know, please subscribe, it really does help. So let's get on and I'll show you how I did it. So the first thing we're going to be looking at is our base for the boards. I'm going to be using 6mm MDF. Now this MDF sheets cost me £15 for 16 1 foot by 1 foot boards. B&Q do have a cutting service, but they wouldn't go as small as this, so I had to go to like a local timber merchants. As I said, you can go 1.5 foot by 1.5 foot. Really, you need to think about the dimensions of your game that you want to play and the size of the boards and the roads, etc. In this case, I'm going with 1 foot by 1 foot, and we're going to go from there. And then it's all about the logic of how is your city boards going to go together. So we're going to build, initially we're going to say, let's just build a crossroad. So we'll have a 4-way junction in the middle, and then, you know, 4 single road pieces, and then we'll have the corners where the buildings go. Now, the main key thing here is the dimensions of your road and your paths. Now you can do whatever the hell you like. The only thing you need to do is you have the width of your road be consistent and you have the width of your paths be consistent. However you achieve that will be perfect. Now, there's a couple of things to note, like what size are you going to have your pavement slabs? What size are you going to have your roads? Is it going to be 1-way, 2-way, etc.? Is it based in New York? Is it based in the UK? Whatever you're going to do in that sense. Now, I'll tell you what I did, and it's a little bit more complicated, but basically I didn't want to have 1 inch by 1 inch squares for my side paths. So I decided that my stones, my pavements, I would actually divide 1 foot by 10, which equates to about 3.1 centimeters, right? 3.1 centimeters. So I'm actually going to do 3 centimeter times 3 centimeter squares. Now it's not going to be precise, so but I'm expecting that to be okay because of, like, you know, the gaps in the stones, etc. So my width of my pavements is actually 3 centimeters plus 3 centimeters plus I think 0.6 centimeters for the curb. That leaves me with a road of 17 centimeters. Whatever you do, whatever you decide, it's fine. Just try and keep it consistent across your table, obviously your boards. Now we're going to draw that onto the boards, and then we're going to mask off the pavements because we're now going to do the road texture. The only problem with doing this is that you might find for your corners, what you need to do is essentially have a square, and that's going to be the width of your path plus the width of your path, so that, like, it's a square, so that's the length of the sides. So you're going to mask that off so that only your road is showing. And there's many different ways to do the roads, slash asphalt slash tarmac. I've done 5 different ways in one of my previous videos. I will leave a link to that in the corner, so do check that out. You could even just use sand and PVA. If you're going to use sand and PVA though, just be careful because MDF is possibly prone to warping, so you don't really want to drown your MDF in PVA. You've masked off your paths now. We're going to make the roads. I'm going to use this AK Interactive Terrains asphalt. It's a very nice material, leaves a very, very nice texture. The only downside to it is once it dries, it can transfer very easily, but we're going to paint it anyway, and then that problem goes away. So we're going to just whack this stuff on. You can use like a plastic spatula, etc., or a plastic fork, a plastic knife, or whatever you want. I just get my hands dirty. If you want to smooth it out, it's very much like filler. A little bit of water will smooth it out. It sort of reminds me of like filler, black paint and sand, but like better. Much better. So with this stuff, it's very good though. You just want to whack it on. Use like water to help smooth it out. Now, one tub of this costs about £10, right? Now, I managed to do my board and 2 extra pieces with this stuff before I ran out. However, I did actually want to do a few more pieces, so I've now gone ahead and bought another tub. You can probably get away with just using one, but what that means is that you don't want to be liberal with this stuff. You want to try and conserve it as much as you can and spread it as thinly as you can, just to get as much use out of it basically as possible. Now, you want to take your tape off before this stuff dries, as it dries very hard. As I said, it's very similar to filler / spackle, so in that sense you want to remove the tape as soon as possible. Now, for your corners, obviously you're going to have masking off the corner bit. If you're going to do a curve, I just freehandly drew my curves. I sort of measured 1 centimetre down on each side and just drew it in with a pen. It's a bit hard to explain. You could be more mathematical if you want and get like a protractor, but basically for the corners you're going to want squares, and then maybe you want to curve off an edge if you want a curving corner. It's up to you though how you do that. And to mask it off though, you can just sort of draw the same curve on your tape and then cut the tape, and then you've pretty much, you know, got the corner that you want. I'm actually using blue 3D printing tape here. You can just use masking tape. That would actually probably have been better. So take off your tape, and then we've got our roads. Make sure everything lines up. It really should. So at this stage, I'm not sure I showed this on the video, but I've got my junction in the middle and then 4 single straights. I also end up doing a T-junction, but that's neither here nor there, and everything's looking perfectly fine. What we now need to do is the pavement / path / sidewalk, wherever you're from, and all I'm going to use here is extruded polystyrene, but what I'm going to be using is 6mm extruded polystyrene, and I managed to get this very cheap, £10 for 5 very large sheets as modelled by Katie, and yeah, it's really cheap. It's basically underfloor insulation foam, so if you're in other countries you might want to look for that. If you are failing to find this, then you can just use foam board, but I just like this stuff because it allows you to put in a texture, or I actually just use the texture that's already on it because it had these nice very faint lines, but it's completely up to you. What you need to do though is cut out the foam the size of your pavement. Now, the bits that don't have roads, so the bits that are buildings, you could just going to cut out 1 foot by 1 foot squares and glue that on, and the bits that have paths, obviously you're going to cut out your foam to match where the exact size of your pass, and obviously I'm using my stupid 6.6 centimeters, but you know, you can use whatever you want. For the corners, I literally for the corners did a like template on card and then just drew it, and then drew that onto the foam and then cut that out, just because it was a bit easier to do it that way. Once you've got all your cutouts, all your foam that is the right size that's going to go onto your boards, we're simply going to glue it on. Now, what you don't want to do, as I mentioned before, is completely cover your MDF in PVA. So what I'm actually going to do is sort of thin lines in what I end up doing. It's like a big square pattern, but you know, you just don't want to spread it out with a brush. You actually just want it like even, but just in the lines with gaps in between. This will stop it warping basically, and obviously you want to make sure that you do get the glue up to the edges because you don't want your foam to lift off. It provides a nice solid bond, does PVA, so I'm sure you'll be okay. Once you've got all your pavements on, now all we really need to do is create the texture of the pavements or whatever you want. As I said, I'm weirdly using 3.1 centimeters times 3 centimeter squares, just because it's 1 foot and I'm using imperial to metric. It's a bit problematic, but I just thought it would end up being okay, and the reality is it looks fine. I'm basically using it's essentially a 2x10 row of pavements per 1 foot. You know, it's up to you. Decide whatever you want to do. There's no right answer there. I'm doing a curb. You don't necessarily even have to do a curb. It's completely up to you. Some people just do one slab. Whatever you like, it's, as I said, it's completely up to you. I just cut out a bit of card just so I had a bit of consistency and all my pavements were the same. You just want, you know, you don't want, you want it to be mirrored. You don't want it to look asymmetrical. You sort of want symmetry in this sense. And when I say like we're going to draw that in, I'm literally going to draw that in with a pen. You're going to indent your foam with it. You could do the same with foam board, so don't worry about that. You're going to indent your foam with the pen. You can go over it with a knife if you want it, if you want to be sure about it. For the curbs, you can do little indents to make it look like several chunks of curbs rather than one giant curb. And with the pen, You can also go on ahead and do cracks if you want to do that. I tried not to go overboard with cracks because I was a little bit worried that it would look super unnatural. For the curbs, if you want, you can take a bit of sandpaper and sand the edges so it's a bit more round, or you can have the square curb. It's completely up to you. I think I sand some of them and not others because I'm lazy. Yeah, it's completely up to you. I wouldn't go overboard with the cracks. And for the texture, you could go over it with some tinfoil if you wanted. But the reality is this stuff already had a bit of texture on it because it's a high density foam. It already has a bit of a texture. Foam board, if you wanted though, you wouldn't really be able to get a texture in it, so I wouldn't bother. It's a bit of a faff, but you need to completely do all of your pavements in that sort of pattern, whatever you're going to do, the squares, etc. The bits where you're just going to have your buildings, I'm going to just leave as like one solid chunk. I'm not going to do extra paths, but you know, if you wanted to be creative, you could do something else. Then we're going to get some black paint, some PVA, about a 50-50 mix, and we're going to cover the whole thing in this mixture just to try and solidify it. I know Blackmagic Craft, he recommends Mod Podge. I'm not really sure if there's any difference between that, but we want to try and protect it the best we can, because since doing this, I've slightly damaged some of the foam, so I should actually probably go back and maybe varnish it or what have you. But cover the whole thing in this black paint, nice solid colour, maybe do 2 colours if you want. Do the roads, even though we're probably going to have to come back and do the roads again, but just do everything, cover the whole thing in this mixture, because we just want to solidify it up and protect it from damage. Now this might be a little bit tricky to see on camera because of pure black, but then we're going to do the pavement. So now I probably messed this up. I think I would have preferred my pavements to be more like a buff titanium kind of colour, like a creamy yellowy white kind of colour, instead of concrete, because I think that's actually possibly more common in New York. Instead, I end up with a weird hybrid, but just try and think of the colours that you want. For my pavements though, I pretty much cover the whole thing in a medium grey. I think it's literally just called neutral grey. And I'm not dry brushing this, although you could if you wanted to try and skip a step. I'm literally going to give it pretty much a whole cover, but I'm not necessarily going to worry about the recesses too much. And we're going to do that on the big pieces as well. We're covering almost all of it except the road in this neutral grey. Now before I end this, I do add a little bit of buff titanium to this neutral grey, which just warms it up and gives it a little bit of a yellower colour, and I do that on the paths. But it's, you know, it's completely up to you to pick the colour you want. And then, now you don't necessarily have to do this because we have the high density foam, but if you were using foam board, it's recommended that you do this. We're going to sponge on a mixture of different colours. So I'm going to get some darker grey, some lighter grey, some with a bit of buff titanium in, some without, etc. And we're just going to sponge that on across all of the paths. And you can do this on all of the big squares as well, but we're going to do that on all of the paths, just so you've got like natural shade, natural highlights, etc. It just really like provides a bit of variation rather than it being all one colour. So just sponge it on. I literally just use like a sponge that we use to like wash dishes. Obviously it's a new one, and I just tear it up into random shapes, but it's completely up to you how you do that. Once you've sponged it all on, you're happy with that, what I'm going to do is get it's a very light grey. I think it's actually called, it's something from Wilkinson's, but it's like a very, very, very light off-white kind of grey, and I'm just going to dry brush absolutely everything. Now you might notice here there's some nice variations on the concretey bits. I'm going to just leave the concretey bits with this off-white kind of colour, although my pants are falling down in the shot that I'm looking at. Hopefully I don't show you that. Yeah, and I'm literally just going to dry brush all of the paths to be this sort of like yellowy, whitish colour. It still has the grey underneath, but you know, you want to catch the corner of the curves, catch the corner of the slabs, etc. We're going to just dry brush the whole thing. Once I actually dry brushed it the first time, I then go in with a black wash, which just scrolling through my footage, I don't seem to have. But basically, once I'd done my sponging, I dry brushed it. I then put on a black wash, a very watered down black wash, completely over absolutely everything. And then once that had dried, I then went back in with the dry brush, concentrating with my more yellowy tones on the paths and then my more grey tones on the concrete where the buildings are going. Once you've completely finished that though, you then want just black on the roads, just plain black on the roads, and we're pretty much like at a decent point. The only thing we need now is our road markings. Now, road markings I found to be an absolute pain in the backsides. So for my junctions, I was like, I want like a zebra crossing kind of thing. I'm not sure you Americans call it that, but just a sidewalk crossing, I don't know whatever you call it. And what I did was I cut in some card, I did like a stencil, and I was like, that'll be great. And I put that down and I taped it to the board and I sponged on my white paint, and it looked absolutely terrible. And then I had this 6mm masking tape, so I was like, well, what I'll do is I'll just mask it all off with my 6mm masking tape, and that looked absolutely terrible. So all I can recommend here is just buy normal plain masking tape and mask it all off individually. And if you end up with squiggly lines at the side of your boxes or your yellow lines for the roads, whatever you're doing, and maybe just mask off the squiggly bit and then go back in with black to try and straighten up the lines. I tried to manually do that with just freehand, and that looked bad. You basically just need to keep masking it until you get it the way you like. Maybe I didn't stick down the masking tape strongly enough or what have you. Either way though, it wasn't very good, and I had to spend a lot of time correcting this, and I found it pretty difficult. For the roads, because I was going with a two-way American style road, I'm literally just going to do a big thick yellow line down the middle. I think I'm using 6mm width for the lines. Again, it's up to you whatever scale you're using. So I do a big thick line down the middle. Now you can go with white and then yellow, but what I actually did, I went with orange and then yellow, and just sort of lightened it up. Basically yellow over black is going to be a very difficult thing to do, so just keep that in mind. And once I've got my big thick line through the middle of all my tiles, I did 2 at a time so that they were sort of joined up, combined together, they would match up. Once you've got your big thick yellow line, then I'm going to mask off the black line through the middle, which is hopefully going to leave me with 2 yellow lines at the side, which it does. And you know, I'm actually pretty pleased with that. And then I tidy it up again using some masking tape and maybe freehanding. I do the stop lines for the junctions. It's completely up to you if you're going to do that or not. And then I do some weathering. For the weathering, I literally just take some black paint, get a sponge, and just dab on some of the lines on both the crossing and the yellow lines. Now, when I showed that to Katie, she was like, "You've ruined it." And then I showed it on Facebook, on Discord, and people were like, "No, it looks good." However, I actually then went a little bit overboard with some of the weathering on the lines, but that's completely up to you how much you go. And then, very briefly, once I'd finished all that, I got a very, very watered down black wash and just did that all over the road, just to sort of take away the shine of the new freshly painted lines. Now, to do the lines, I was using sponge and sponging on the lines. The reality is you could just paint it on, but if you are going to paint it on, you maybe want to like stab at it, like I can't think of the phrase, like you was with a sponge. Just dab at it so you don't end up with painted lines through it. You don't want the texture of your streaks of the brush. So just keep that in mind. Match it all up, and we're pretty much done. So I personally possibly went a little bit overboard with the weathering of my yellow lines. Whatever, mistakes were made. I could mask it all back up and go over it, but I found the masking part of doing the road markings to be an absolute pain in the backside. I have no recommendations for that apart from use proper masking tape and make sure you stick it down as best you can, and then just brush it on or sponge it on. If you are going to brush it on, just dab it on basically, because you don't want the texture, as I said. But yeah, I'll go back over some of the points. I did 1 foot by 1 foot tiles because I need to get it up in my loft / attic. The sides of the road and the sides of the paths, try and come up with something you're happy with. As I said, I didn't want 1-inch squares, so a lot of my effort was to avoid that. So I end up using like this weird combination of 3.1 times 3 centimeter squares with a curb of 0.6 millimeters. It's weird, but it gave me the side of the road that I wanted and the side of the path that I wanted. As long as your road is consistent and your path is consistent, everybody will be happy. I masked it all off, did my asphalt. I used that specialized product. Pretty happy with it, really nice effect. You can just use many other different options if you like, sand, PVA, filler, etc., sandpaper. Then you do your paths. In this case, I'm using that foam. You can just use foam board if you want. Obviously, if you won't be able to texture foam board, that's why I like dabbing on the sponge for variation. It's more important if you're going to use foam board. You've cut that to size, you glue that onto your board. Don't drown the whole thing in in PVA, that would be bad. Then I did the texture and the markings for the path. Now I do actually use a bit of tinfoil on my big squares just to get a bit of variation, but you just damage it up in little bits, but not like ridiculous. It's completely up to you. Once you've got your pavement, you've got your markings, you've done it in with a pen, cover the whole thing in your colours, your grey, dry brush it up, a wash, dry brush it back, do the road, paint that black, do your road markings, which is a pain, and you're pretty much done. Next thing for me to do is buildings. Not sure what I'm doing yet. Probably 3D print something tomorrow, if he says. But I'm really happy with the effect. The road markings took way longer than they should have. The bulk of the main part of the building work was very quick, and really for me, if I add up the cost, we have the boards £15, the underfloor heating tile things £10, the terrain asphalt diorama stuff £10. So we're up to I can't do maths very quickly, £35, and that's pretty much it really. You just need paints, etc., but you don't need anything else other than that. And if I did foam board, the cost would probably be the same because we don't have the dollar store foam board in the UK. If you have any questions or anything like that, do leave them in the description, in the comment below, and I'll obviously reply. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully some people will find that useful. I do recommend watching Mel the Terrain Shooter's video if there's anything I missed. He, however, he uses an airbrush to do his lines. If you've got one, fine, use that. He uses foam board, as I said. I use this, so I've got texture. He does sandpaper for the roads. Sandpaper is limited by joins and the width of the sandpaper, so there's pros and cons to different ways of doing it. I'm using 1 foot by 1 foot, which allows me now to possibly have more modularity because I can do different sheets. I could do a park one for a park, and that would have nice variation, etc. I can do different layouts. I could do T junctions here and have like a H letter, etc. There's many different things I could do, and I feel like that's, for me, a good thing. It's up to you to do it whatever the way you like. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.